All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison, and welcome to Web Wednesday, the show where I bring on people that are much smarter than me to talk about cool things web dev. Today, I'm actually very pleased to bring back on Anthony Chu. If you haven't already seen Anthony present or just talk about technology, he's fantastic. He's absolutely brilliant. He's really passionate and knows probably more about doing serverless code, serverless computing, and Azure Functions than I will ever know. So he's always just a fantastic guest to have. Today he's coming on to talk about a really cool little service called Signalr. And if you're not familiar with Signalr, what Signalr allows you to do is to do real-time messaging. So that way, if I want to maybe enable chat, or if I want to do something where I've detected that an event has occurred on the server, and I want to be able to send a message down to a browser-based client, then Signalr can do those types of things for you. And it's a really neat both SDK as well as service, and it can also help simplify doing what would typically require a fair bit of code if you were going to do this natively using WebSockets. But you didn't come here to hear me talk about it. You came to hear Anthony talk about it. So let me bring Anthony on. Anthony, thanks again for joining. It's always wonderful to have you on Web Wednesday to chat about anything. And honestly, it's just always fun to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Yeah, I had a great time last time. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So let's because I know that you've got a really cool demo that you're going to take us to in a few minutes. But let's sort of start here. What is real time messaging? What does this mean in the web space?
Yeah, so in the web space, we're typically talking about things like WebSockets. But in the early days, like there wasn't WebSockets, and the first thing that we probably did in the 10, 20 years ago was just keep pinging a server to see if there's any new messages, right? So quite inefficient, but kind of gets the job done. And then we kind of figured out new ways of doing it. There's a technique called long polling, where you open a connection to the server and the server actually doesn't respond until there is a real-time update. So it's a little bit more efficient than keep polling all the time over and over again. And then for a while there, and I think it's still exists right now, there's a technology called server sent events that you can also use to kind of push real-time messages from a server to a client like a browser or even a mobile app. And then, but in the last 5, 10 years, WebSockets has kind of gone everywhere, and that seems to be what everyone's using these days. And you can actually work with WebSockets pretty easily just by using just plain JavaScript in the browser and connecting to a WebSocket. But a library like Socket.io or Signalr, which we're talking about today, it's actually like an abstraction on top of it, I guess you can say. So what that means is that instead of actually working with the raw WebSockets and actually working with the frames, sending frames to the server, getting frames back from the server, you're actually working at one or two levels above it. So you end up doing things like sending messages from the server to a client, very much like you are just sending pushing a message to a queue or something like that, or even just doing like a remote kind of procedure call type of thing. It's a lot more natural. And then you can also have access to kind of higher level concepts like you can put like connections into groups or rooms.
Oh,
Just basically create arbitrary groups. So instead of keeping track of whichever your users, whichever connections happen to be from, say, Seattle, and then you only want to send a message to only people in Seattle. Without a library like that, you have to kind of manage all that yourself. And then when you need to send it, you actually literally have to iterate through all the different WebSocket connections and send these messages down. Whereas, with both Socket.io and Signalr and other kind of libraries like it, you would literally just make a call and say, hey, send this message to this group. and then it just does it. So a lot of the group and user management, it's all done for you. Another thing that stuff like this will do for you is that you don't have to worry about what if my client, whether it's, it could be a super old browser, it could be, a fairly old, phone device that might not actually support WebSockets. These protocols will actually these libraries will actually fall back to the other kind of methods that I mentioned before, like server-sent events or even long polling, so that you still program exactly the same way. You say send a message, but it figures out for that connection which protocol to use, so you don't have to worry about it. And things connections and stuff like that, that's all built in.
Okay. So that way, if for whatever reason a browser didn't support WebSockets, that it's still able to thunk down to an earlier technology and guarantee me then that I'll be able to quote unquote send a real-time message, even if it's not actually doing it with a real-time stack.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What so we've sort of like mentioned that WebSockets is this cool new thing. What is WebSockets, and how does that compare to like HTTP or HTTPS?
Yeah, so it's a bidirectional protocol. So you can actually send messages from the server to a client, but clients can also send messages upstream. That's really the main difference. There's, like if you look at the actual protocol itself, you kind of go pretty deep into the differences. But like for day-to-day use, that's really all you really need to know. You're sending these frames back and forth down this bidirectional channel.
Okay. So as opposed to, and I'm just going to simply say HTTPS, or sorry, HTTP rather. But as opposed to just like normal HTTP, where what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a request, via PostGet or whatever it is, and then get a response back. And then once that's done, then we basically tear down that connection, and that's it. With WebSocket, then it sounds like I'm going to be able to like almost like treat it like it's on my network from what it sounds like, as if I was just able to just do a little TCP signal to it, only instead obviously it's a web-based protocol where now I'm able to send a message up to the server, and then the server is at some later point able to send a message back down to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. I can get behind that. So, so Signalr, then you mentioned that it's an SDK, that's something that can help make it easier for me to start programming with WebSockets.
Yeah, so it's an SDK that came out of the ASP.NET world. You actually don't need ASP.NET to use it now that we have a service. And that's what we're actually going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we can use JavaScript and Python code running in serverless functions and Azure Functions to work with Signalr Service to basically get the same capability in other languages. And as an SDK, there's I think there's multiple languages that we support in terms of clients. So web is obviously covered with JavaScript and TypeScript, but there's also a Java client, there's a C++ client. And throughout the community, there are different clients that are kind of produced in open source for things like Swift and Python and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. So then from a client side, I'm not bound to only use a browser, that I could also be using a fat client, like I could be using a phone app, or I could be using, a desktop application and still be able to communicate with Signalr.
Yeah. So it's quite flexible that way. And you kind of mentioned mobile. So one of the things that people quite often will kind of get confused by a little bit when talking about WebSocket technology is that this is not the push notifications on your phone that we typically talk about. That's typically very specific to whether you're using Apple or Google and stuff like that. So that's totally separate from WebSockets. WebSockets is when you have your app open. Say you open up a map, for example. For instance, you're looking for a car share, and you kind of see the little cars moving around on the map. That's probably WebSocket. But when you close the app and you exit out, and then you get a notification from your app saying that your driver is here, that's typically push notification that's sent another way. And that's not what we're talking about today.
Okay. And then I guess it also bears highlighting the fact that this is also different from those browser notifications that everybody is going to say no to, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about WebSockets.
Right. Yeah, WebSockets is not annoying like that, no.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So WebSockets is really about like being able to maybe like create a chat application, or that maybe there's a long running process, like maybe I'm placing an order or doing something like that. The server's now going to do a few things. It's going to take it maybe 15, 30 seconds, a few minutes. And then now it wants to let me know that that's completed, that it can do that with WebSockets. Or I'm also thinking maybe like, if I'm watching or if I'm following a sporting event, and like somebody has scored, if I've got the page open, then it can refresh the page then, or update that piece of data using WebSockets.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's just so many uses for it now. Like we don't even think about it anymore. When you open up a web page, you just expect things to just happen without you pressing the refresh button. I think we pretty much take that for granted now.
Yeah. So. I'd agree with that. Zimbabwe Dungeon Master, which is a great name, asked the question: is Signalr good for server-server communication, say for an old project where there's no gRPC?
Yeah, I think that should work fine. You obviously have to weigh the kind of pros and cons. You definitely have to opt into the to the protocol. So as long as you kind of own both sides, it's typically not too bad. But if you want like external services to connect to your service, quite often, like a old-fashioned HTTP REST API type of a thing will be easier for other services to use without kind of like binding yourself to a specific library like Signalr or Socket.io. But yeah, aside from that, it works well for that purpose. I've seen people use it, but for for generic kind of API for service, we do typically see people fall back to using HTTP APIs.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And again, the key difference is we're always looking for the need for two-way communication. That if all that I need to do is make a request, I get a response, and I'm good with that, then we can just again go back to HTTP. It's really if I'm looking for that ability to have two-way conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the Signalr service. What is the Signalr service?
So it's a service in Azure that basically makes it really easy to use Signalr without you needing to write an ASP.NET app and creating it, or spinning up a Express app and using Socket.io in it to kind of have access to like a library like Socket.io or Signalr. So you can spin up an instance of Signalr Service in Azure, and there's actually a free tier, so you don't have to pay for anything. You can use it for up to like 20 connections or something like that, which is plenty for a lot of apps. And that's it. Like, so you don't have to worry about managing anything like that. So your clients will connect to that, and we need to send messages to your client behind the scenes. If you're using Azure Functions, there's actually some output bindings that you can use in Azure Functions that makes it super easy with a single line of code to send these messages out. So you don't even need to figure out how to talk to the service. Behind the scenes, we just do everything for you.
Okay. And so since you mentioned Azure Functions, I'd be remiss if I didn't then ask about Azure Static Web Apps, which if anybody's not familiar, Azure Static Web Apps is probably the best thing that we've released since Visual Studio Code, which I know is a bold statement. But it gives you that ability to run those types of applications where the bulk of your code is going to be on the client side, which is really how we do modern web dev these days, that you get that and your server-side code using functions in one very nice, neat package. I'm guessing then that the Signalr service would be able to work then with Azure Static Web Apps as well.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to show you an example of that running in Azure Static Web Apps, actually working with the authentication in Static Web Apps. Like the Signalr team always makes fun of me for doing chat demos, but I will show you a chat demo. I do find that with chat, like it is kind of like overdone in a sense, but also it is probably the easiest concept. I don't have to explain to you what a chat app does, right? I can just show you the code. So it's yeah, I think it's a good way to kind of show you how Signalr works, and then we could go into other things. And I do plan to show you some more interesting stuff, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like, there are certainly those like stock standard demos that everybody goes to, but you know, sometimes everybody goes to it for a good reason. Though, what's great about that chat app, like you said, is not only A, does everybody know what it is, but B, it makes it really easy for me to be able to demo. Like, I don't need to do anything fancy. Like, I just type something here, and then poof, something happens over here, which is really the effect that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Should we take a look at how to do this?
Actually, I'm going to throw in one last question from Andruha about Signalr Service. Asks if it's instance-based or serverless.
It's instance-based right now. Although I think it's a pretty common request for it to for them to offer consumption-based pricing, so per connection. So currently it's not. So if you need to go over that, there is like a fixed instance price that you need to that you go up to. I'm not sure whether or not they support auto scaling yet.
Okay.
So you do kind of have to pre-provision these things called units, and each unit gives you like 1,000 connections. But I know it's definitely on their roadmap to see if they can support consumption-based pricing.
Okay. And then Egoist asks if Signalr requires an implementation using async await.
No. So I think like those two kind of concepts are probably a little bit orthogonal, and that's yeah, like there's nothing like in Signalr itself that requires async await.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but typically, like most of the SDKs do return promises or tasks in C#. So you do end up using async await with it. But I don't think there's anything that sort of requires you to use async await.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some code here.
All right. So I think the first thing we're going to do is, because it's going to take about a minute or two to create a Signalr service, let's do that. So I'm in the Azure portal. It's fairly easy to do. I search for Signalr, and then I say I want a new thing. So I'm just going to go and create a new resource called Web Wednesday. And maybe I'll call it Web Wednesday.
Very creative in the names. I appreciate that.
I try my best. Actually, yeah, like when I code, or well, now as a PM, I code less. Naming is the thing I hate the most. I always ask someone else for naming.
I feel that.
And then I'm going to pick a location nice and close to me. And then I'm going to pick the free tier. And then down here, hopefully this is big enough. I'm trying to make it bigger.
There you go.
And there's the default and classic. I don't need to explain to you what they are, because we're not using them today. We're going to use the serverless one. That's the one where we can use with Azure Functions. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create it after the button lights up. Okay, so it's going to go off and get created. I think in probably a minute or two we should have one. So while that's happening, let's take a look at how we can work with it from Azure Functions.
Okay, let me actually sneak in a real quick question here. Zimbabwe Dungeon Master asked the question, how big is the message buffer, and is it per hub or per group?
The message buffer, I guess it really depends on what we mean by message buffer. I think in the past, Signalr has had the ability to sort of support, like when you disconnect accidentally, or I don't know, on purpose or whatever. When you reconnect, the messages that you kind of missed will get replayed to you. Well, not really replayed, because you never got it the first time, right. But we'll get sent down to you. And there used to be a buffer there. I believe in the latest versions of Signalr, that's because that's like both really memory intensive and also really hard to get right. We stopped supporting that. So typically the pattern that I see people use, and I'll kind of show you later on when a more full blown web app, is that when you reconnect, you go and reach out to a different endpoint, or maybe when you reconnect on connection, the server, or in this case, a serverless function, will actually send you the latest updates. Right. Okay. So for instance, for a chat app, when you connect, the first thing you do is like, hey, give me the most recent chat messages, so that you can repaint your screen and then start listening for new ones. That seems to be a more kind of scalable and easier to kind of reason about way of supporting buffers, or like versus actually creating a buffer for every connection, and then worry about how to get rid of it and stuff like that. I hope that's that's what they meant by buffer, but if not, please ask a follow-up.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, let's build an app.
All right, so I'm going to assume a little bit of knowledge of Azure Functions. Even if not, I'll try to walk through a little bit of it. So in Azure Functions, the first thing that you need to do is create what's called an app. And then within an app, you can have more than one functions. And these functions are serverless. And I'm going to be running these locally on my machine right now. And then some of the other demos I'll show are actually going to be running in the cloud.
Okay.
So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say create a new project. And this is using the Azure Functions extension in VS Code. And I'm going to choose this folder that I already created. I will use JavaScript. And let's see, what should I do? I will, oh yeah. I need to switch to a different set of templates so I can see everything. And I'm going to choose this thing called the Signalr Negotiate HTTP trigger. It's a really long name. Funny enough, I think I added this item to this menu and I named it. So see, I shouldn't be trusted to name anything. And I'll quickly kind of talk about what the negotiate thing does. You kind of can ignore it when you first get started with Signalr, but basically, in order to kind of figure out for basically the browser or the client to figure out, where your Signalr service is, it needs to first call an endpoint to figure that out. And that's what the negotiate endpoint does. It's actually part of the Signalr protocol. So the first thing that it does is actually going to make an HTTP post to an endpoint. And by convention, it needs to be named negotiate with documentation and all that. But then you don't have to do a heck of a lot in an Azure Function app for this to work. You can see that using a template, we already kind of created an HTTP function. So this function would just become an HTTP endpoint in the cloud. And it's going to be, because the route is negotiate, it's going to be at slash whatever HTTP, whatever domain name I get for my function app, /API/negotiate. And Signalr Service will just know how to talk to it. I'll show you kind of that piece of the code in a bit. And then down here, we're basically getting access to this thing called a connection info. And what this thing does is that it kind of gives you this payload that you need to return back to the client so that it knows what to do with it. And again, you don't have to worry too much about how this works because most of it is kind of done for you in the by the templates. But you do need one of these things. And typically in here, if you need to assign like a connection to a group, or you need to associate a connection to a user so that you can you can send messages that are only going to be received by a user. You might need to do a little bit more stuff in the negotiate function. But typically, if you just want to do a broadcast to everything that's connected, you don't really have to do anything here. You just kind of take everything as is, and that's that. So, and should I run it? I'll run the whole thing in a bit later, because so the other thing that I want to kind of show you now is with the negotiate function, what that allows the browser or any client to do is to connect to Signalr Service. So the next thing, actually the real thing that your app wants to do is actually, when something happens, whether it's because you receive an HTTP request into your function app, or your function app could be listening for queue messages, for example, and then every time you get a queue message, you want to broadcast that out over your WebSocket, or it could be a change over Cosmos DB, or it could be a change in blob storage. Basically, any trigger that you can set up in Azure Functions, you can basically turn around and when one of those events happen, turn around and send a message to all your connected clients over Signalr. So so I've seen stuff like like for instance moving stuff around in a map, right? So like imagine you get an event every time an airplane moves in the sky. You can actually take that and broadcast that out to browsers, and then you can actually paint that plane moving on a map. So things like that. It's pretty flexible. But for our purposes here, because we're building a chat app, I will just create an HTTP endpoint. And how do I do that? Say create function, And then I just want an HTTP function. And I'm going to call it messages. And anonymous is fine. We don't need security for a demo. Okay. So let's see, what should I do? So this is just a plain HTTP trigger. So it's going to become an endpoint as /API/messages. And the idea is that every time we want to send a message, we can post to this endpoint. And the body of the message will be, the message itself, I guess.
Okay, so people aren't going to call the negotiate directly. That they're gonna do everything then through this this Azure function.
Yeah, so this is the thing that actually does most of the work, which is relaying a message, from one client to everybody else. It'll make maybe a little bit more sense once we kind of fire it up and see it run. But what we need to do now is that we need to use what's called an output binding for this. So I can say add a binding, and I want an output binding, and I want a Signalr binding. And then the naming thing again. I'll call it messages or message, new message. How about that? And I think I'm going to say default here, but I'll tell you why. So Signalr has a concept of hubs. So you can actually divide a single Signalr service into multiple hubs. So you can try to think of them as namespaces. So if your app happens to support both like a real-time chat kind of a thing, but another part of your app might support like a little, real-time notification, like changing like the number of messages that appear in the corner of your screen or whatever it is. You can actually have two different kind of hubs, we call it, to take care of each of those types of messages. So you don't have to worry about using a single hub and figuring out, like this message is actually a chat message. This one is actually a notification. You don't have to worry about any of that. You can divide it up into multiple namespaces. And I'm going to call this one a default. And I'll tell you why in a sec. And then I need to just give it a setting name. And I'm going to call it Azure Signalr connection string.
And that app setting is going to be on the server or in Azure. I shouldn't technically say on the server because it's serverless, but that's where it's going to sit there and it's going to store then the location of that Signalr service, correct?
Yeah, it's actually it's going to be a connection string. It's going to include both the location of it as well as a key.
Okay.
And then the app setting value, I'm gonna skip that because I need to figure out what that is, and I'll probably want to do this off screen because I don't want to show you what that is. So that's done there. Also another long name. Again, I came up with that name. So basically anytime you see a long name, I probably had something to do with it because I couldn't figure out how to make it shorter.
I'm okay with long names. I mean, if it's something that's going to be automatically filled, or especially if it's something that, there's some form of an autocomplete or IntelliSense, long names are okay. Like I would much prefer a longer name that describes what it is than a short name where I'm having to figure out what in the world it's supposed to do.
Okay, that's good. So I named this binding new message. So in here now, I can pretty much get rid of all of this. So the first thing that I want to do is get access to the body of the request. So I'm going to say const just message equals request.body, I think. So that'll give me basically the body itself. And I actually don't really want to do anything with it. You can do some validation in here if you want, or you probably should, because anyone can send anything to this thing. But again, demo, no security. So I'm just going to relay this back to all the connected clients. So in order to do that, I would have to talk to the context, which gives me some bindings. And then for new message binding, because that's the name I gave the Signalr output binding, I'm going to assign it to an object. And I can actually assign it to an array. If I want to send a pile of messages out all at once, I can actually use an array of these objects, but I'm only going to send one. So I'm just going to have an object. And this object takes two things. And again, this is all in documentation, so you don't have to worry about memorizing it like I have here. So the first argument, I guess, that it needs is a thing called a target. And that is really a name of an event. I'm actually going to call it new message as well. So that's just an event's name. Don't have to worry about too much why or what that is. And then arguments. and then the arguments is an array, and then I'm just going to pass the message. It's only going to have one argument, but it can have more.
Okay.
And that's it. So that's really all the code that we need to send that message. So one thing that I'll do here, just kind of
making the case for using TypeScript here, because then I could, create the interface for what new message is going to be, and I can, then of course know what my rec is, because I can add in the type hint and all of that. So if you haven't already started using TypeScript, you should definitely use TypeScript.
Yeah, I'm okay with TypeScript. I think we had this conversation last time about how I have I wouldn't say love-hate relationship, but I'm kind of like I can go both ways. I kind of like the simplicity of the JavaScript as well. I'm just going to create a very simple HTML page here as we're kind of chatting to kind of show you how to now use an HTML page to connect to Signalr Service. So I'm going to do a couple of things before that. So in my local.settings.json, this is where we configure that Azure Signalr connection string. And this is where I'm going to type off screen here. So I'm going to go over here. And then, but that still leaves this here. Okay, I'm going to go over here as well. So I'm going to go over to, actually, no, I'll kind of show you what this looks like.
Nothing to see
my resource
here.
created. Nothing to see. I'm going to click on keys. Okay, I'll be back. And then I will copy the connection string. I'll get out of the keys. So okay, I'm back to there, and I'm going to paste in my connection string. And I'm going to save it. And I'm going to bring this thing back on this side. So you can see that I kind of pasted in a connection string. You can't see the key.
Perfect.
Okay. So now this all the serverless server-side stuff will work because that key is there, or that the connection string is there. So I'm going to quickly do one thing here. I'm going to go to this JavaScript CDN called JSDeliver. There's actually better ways of actually acquiring the Signalr SDK for JavaScript. You can npm install if you have like a full-blown React app. But I'm just lazy. So I'm just going to search for Microsoft /Signalr. And there it is. And I'm just going to browse to the browser version of the thing. And I'm just going to copy the HTML. So all that's going to give me is a really simple script tag that brings in Signalr. Okay. But like I said, if you're using React or Vue or really anything that compiles, you would be referring to npm package instead.
Wasn't there an ASP.NET CDN for quite a while?
Yeah, there is. So one of the things that we wanted to do with Signalr, and this is quite a while back, is that we wanted to decouple it from ASP.NET so that people aren't. They don't have they don't get the false kind of impression that it's only for ASP.NET.
That makes sense.
So yes, this is actually it used to be scoped to add ASP.NET, but we changed it to add Microsoft just to make it a little bit more agnostic. But there probably isn't a CDN somewhere. Like JSDeliver is actually a really easy way to really have an HTTP endpoint to any file that's in an npm package or even in a GitHub repo. So yeah, it does all that stuff for you. So you can just reference it. But I'll quickly, So but I'll quickly want to show you what you get to do here. So I'm going to go say const connection equals new Signalr dot hub connection. Yeah, and this is where IntelliSense will come in if you actually use the npm package. I don't get that, so hopefully I'm doing it right.
I'm going to bring you over to the dark side. I'm going to bring you over to TypeScript.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put /API here. So what this means is that I'm telling the Signalr library that my hub endpoint is going to be at /API, and then by default it's actually going to attach /negotiate at the end of it to figure out what the negotiate is. That's how it works. Is that just by saying /API, it will find the right negotiate endpoint that I created over here. And then I can also say something like with automatic reconnect. so that you don't have to worry about, what happens if the connection drops momentarily. It'll just do the reconnect for you. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say .build. And then I'm also going to go connection.start. And this thing returns a promise if you're going to want to wait for it and see, and they kind of like say, connected or whatever, you can do that. I'm going to be lazy and not do that. So then the only thing I have to do now is that I've established the connection. And what I want to do is listen for that new message, I guess, that new message event, so that I can do something with it. So I'm going to say connection.on new message. And then I just need to basically pass a little function in it. And then the message is that argument that I kind of passed on the server side. And then I just have to do something with it. So I'm going to be lazy and just be like console.log that message. And that's it. But you can kind of imagine this actually updating the UI and doing something way more fancy than console log. But I think this should more or less work. I'm going to go ahead and you kind of mentioned the static web apps earlier. So static web apps, we're actually working on a local emulator experience so that you can actually serve or locally spin up a single server that both serves your static assets as well as starts up the function app. So basically the two parts of a static web app both working together at a single endpoint locally. So I'll be using that to start up my app here. So my app consists of my index.html plus some functions. I think I'm in the right place. I'm going to say static web app SWA start, and I want www as where my static web app is, and then I want to say my actually I hope this works. My API is here. So that works. Oh no, where am I already running this? Okay, I'm gonna find my browsers. Is it over here? Is it over here? Oh, it is. Okay, that's the next demo. Okay, here we go. Is it gonna work?
That's funny.
Okay, good. So it's starting up Azure Functions. It's also starting up my my front end as well. So I can go to this 4280 endpoint locally, and I'm actually gonna open up my console because everything's gonna be happening in there. So I'm gonna go localhost 4280. Oh no. Connection argument is required. Uh-oh. Okay, so this is the unexpected part. 1 second.
No worries.
Connection equals new Signalr Hub connection builder. How do I know that? I've done this a few times, but apparently not enough times though. So there we go. Okay, so don't ignore that fave icon thing. That's fine.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of quickly show you what's happened here. So if we look at the network, I'll make this full size. What we've done is that we kind of started the thing, kind of loaded the Signalr thing, but you can see that we're making a request to the negotiate endpoint. And this negotiate endpoint actually comes back with a couple of things: the location of the Signalr hub, or basically Signalr service, as well as a token that the SDK can use to connect to it. You don't have to know anything about this at all. Like that's just kind of like behind the scenes how it works.
Okay.
And then it's going to go now. You can see that it took that endpoint and it's now calling it. So I don't know if you can see it on the mouse over.
There we go.
Thing.
Yep.
Maybe you can, maybe not. Yeah, actually, yeah, because I don't know how much I'm sharing or.
No, yep.
Sometimes it's not coming through.
Yep. No, it's all coming through just fine.
Okay, great. And then this last one here, you can see that this is the final WebSocket connection that's made after it's kind of done that negotiation dance. So this is the only thing that we really care about. And if we look down here, you can see some messages. So I'm going to hope that this thing is actually working.
And if you go back to that real quick, there was one little thing I wanted to highlight there. Go back to that WebSocket. Is the protocol there is different? That it's WSS, which is WebSocket Secure, sort of like HTTPS there. But yeah, that's using it. WebSocket is a different protocol from HTTP. Yeah.
So typically you start from an HTTPS like a connection, and then you upgrade to a WebSocket, and that's what's going to happen here.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm going to take a look at the messages that are coming through here. I don't know how to make it bigger. But you can see that stuff's coming down.
Oh,
These
yeah.
are just pings from the server to make sure that, we're still connected. So I'm going to go back over here and just really kind of quickly make an HTTP request to it. So I'm just going to do it, like you can use Postman for it. I'm going to just do it within VS Code. So I can say post HTTP localhost host colon 4280 /API /messages. How does it know that? Maybe I've done that before. Who knows? Connection. Oh, sorry. Content type is application JSON. I don't even know about that. And then I'm going to pass, I don't know, just like hello world message.
Hold on. What are you doing here? I have never seen this in VS Code.
So this is an extension called HTTP, no REST. Yeah, HTTP client, REST client. Oh, REST client. And what it allows you to do is just basically type out, the HTTP message and just kind of click it. And then you can see that it worked, right? So now if I come over here, you can see that I got that WebSocket frame as well in my console. I got that thing printed out.
Oh, yeah,
so,
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. I don't know what else I can show you, but at least I can do more. I can open up multiple browsers, and you can see that they all receive the message. But at its core, that's how you kind of create the functions that are needed for you to support Signalr, and then also a web page that makes that connection and actually listens to messages. And now it's really just up to you and what you want to do with it. But that's it.
Okay.
And then I can kind of show you a more kind of full-blown version of this. What's a good way to do that? I can go to GitHub. And not that. Let's go to GitHub. Okay, fine. GitHub. I go to my.
I'm still stuck on that on that REST client. I'm blown away by that extension. That's it's now immediately going to become one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I can commit those things to source control,
right.
And it's great. Let's quickly kind of show you how you can turn this into a full-blown chat. So now this is another function app, but it's got the same negotiate endpoint. Nothing special there. I think that even the send message is about the same. It does a little bit more because this is running in static web apps. And it's actually going to parse the headers to figure out who the actual caller is, the user detail. So they can't spoof that. Like they're logged in. So I'm pulling out the user detail, and I'm actually setting that as their sender. So basically setting the sender to that username. So so you're securely sending these messages. So when you see the server saying this message came from Anthony, it really did come from Anthony. But aside from that, it's really kind of the same thing. Like this is the remember the target and arguments thing. Doing exactly the same thing as before. And then there's actually one more thing that we're doing is that in my function.json, I am calling out, I have an output binding for table storage as well. So I'm saving these messages as well. And that's, that's done by this one line of code. So basically this line of code and this line of code both saves a message to storage or to a table, as well as broadcast that message everywhere. So it's really easy to use. And like I was talking about before, when you first connect, you need to get the message history. So I have an HTTP trigger table, basically saying, give me the latest 50 messages. And then the code is literally one line of code. I'm just going to return all those messages back to the browser. So really, I think we have to add maybe 20, 30 lines of code on the server side. And that's going to be everything that you need for this app to run. And then I'll show you the HTML as well. This is using Vue. So just a lot of HTML stuff, but really down here, you'll recognize the connection stuff. You'll recognize me setting up a listener for the new message. Which is now just opposed to the server, so I'm posting my endpoint. Get authenticated users, don't worry about that. Load messages history. So when you first start up, we're going to make a get to the messages endpoint. that's going to return messages from the table. And that's really all it is. Like, it's just a standard view app. And then if I go to, I think it's like chat.anthonychu.com, it might already be logged in. Let's say I'm logged out. So let me log out.
Now,
It's my
that
static web app.
log out that you're using, is that something that's built into static web apps, or are you like using the Graph Toolkit?
No, this is actually completely from static web apps. So I didn't really have to do anything. When I click this button, I'm actually literally just redirecting to the login kind of like endpoint for static web apps.
Okay.
And because I'm already logged into GitHub, it's going to bounce me right back. So you can see that I'm logged in. I tested this 4 months ago. Hope it still works. Testing. And you can see it worked. If I, and then if I kind of copy this and open up a new browser, paste that in, come back over here, say hi. You can see that both browsers get in, right? So really easy to do, and yeah, it works. So that's how you would build a real world app with it, and yeah, it's fairly straightforward to have to kind of deploy this to static web apps.
Okay, and so then I could go and like sign in with my GitHub. Of course, I'm going to need to MFA real quick here. Chugga. Boop 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 boop. And
all right, I'm excited. I'm waiting.
I'm going to authorize it. Grant consent. Anthony now owns half of everything that is mine.
Hey, it worked.
There it is. Very cool.
Nice. That is awesome. I wasn't sure if that was going to work. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I wrote it, so who knows what's going to happen.
I had full faith in you.
Yeah, but so maybe in the last 5-10 minutes, do you want to like look at a couple other kind of non-chat examples?
Yeah. You mentioned.
And if there's any questions, feel free to toss them to me as well. Yeah, I'll show you that Python one. So that's right here. I had my let's see. So this is this now has quite a few different apps in it. So I have an Azure Functions app, and you can see a negotiate endpoint. The only difference is now written in Python, but it's basically the same thing. And you can see that. Let me close that. Yeah,
your chat app is now getting hits as people are logging in and.
Oh no. Okay.
Sending messages.
Well, at least I know you're logged in.
Yeah,
so don't
yeah, it's all good.
There are people. All right.
Yep.
Yeah. Otherwise,
yeah.
I haven't built a moderation feature yet. And I just have another one here that instead of listening to HTTP, I'm listening to event hubs, which is like our kind of like high scale event kind of a hub or kind of event bus type of a thing in Azure. So the idea is that I'm simulating how you could potentially have maybe a Python script running on a bunch of Raspberry Pis that are just taking, temperature readings or whatever kind of readings, just shooting that off into event hubs. And then on the other end of it, it's going to trigger this function. And this function is, again, not going to do a heck of a lot. It's just going to relay basically the payload from the event, which in this case is like some fake temperature that it read from some fake device, and just relay it off to connected clients.
Okay.
But I wanted to use this to kind of show that it's not just limited to Python or, it's not just limited to C# or JavaScript. It works in Python too.
And it's just doing like a normal, like there's nothing that's fancy there, that it's just reading off of the event and then using JSON loads to convert the JSON into a Python dictionary, Python object, and then you're just returning that back using JSON dumps.
Yep. Yeah, so really it's not doing much. And this one line of code sends that message to everybody. So that's the function app. I don't think there's too much to show you there. I can skip the device simulator. It's just a fake script for me to just randomly generate temperature, a couple times a second and just shoot that down to event hubs. And then I'll show you the Signalr client, which is a Python script. And yeah, so it's like 20 lines of code or something like that. But you can see very similar code that you saw. Make a connection. And on every time I see a new message, I am going to write it to my screen. And I'm going to use, I forgot the library that I used it's called terminal plot. So this is really low, like basically looks like this. It looks like it's still connected, so maybe it still works. Actually, let me stop it for now. Because I got to start everything up. Okay, so I think I kind of talked about everything. I'm going to go ahead and start my Azure Function app. Oh no! Oh, something's using that port. Stop! I need to go stop this.
It's probably your last time
stop
out.
this. Yep. Stop that. Stop that. Okay, go back over here. Hopefully this works.
And I did notice that Signalr Cores is just available as a normal Python library, so you just pip install.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. And someone else kind of created this, so it's not an official Microsoft library, but it works pretty good from what I can tell. And I don't know why I closed that. I meant to go over here. So my function app is up. So now it's time to send some fake messages. So just shooting some fake messages out. And then if I flip back over to my function app, you can see that it's actually running. And then I can go off into my terminal now, and I'll restart my client. And you can see the little messages coming down here.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's painting it onto the screen in probably, I don't know, 1970s fashion. So if you squint, you might see a graph.
No, I can start to see how that's coming together.
So you kind of write, yeah, like so you have end to end, both, like the thing that's sending the messages, the function app itself, as well as the thing that's listening to Signalr messages, all working in Python. So if that's your thing, you don't have to learn anything else.
I dig it. Okay. Well, we'll get Jem Bennett into this, since he's all about IoT and Python.
Yeah, actually, shout out to, I don't know if you know Dave Glover, but he actually helped me out with figuring out how to connect to maybe Signalr, or he helped me with something. Oh no, he helped me with how to send messages from a Python script. So shout out to Dave.
That's fantastic. So if people wanted to learn more about, say, Signalr, or if they wanted to learn more about Azure Static Web Apps, where would they go to find said information?
I think like documentation is probably the actually, like, this thing is really distracting me. I'm going to stop that. Stop.
That's right. I switched back to a dual screen, so you're all good.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so I don't even have to show you anything. Okay. Yeah, so our Microsoft Docs is a great place to start. So especially to use Signalr Service with serverless. In the Signalr Service documentation, we have basically Azure Functions examples for every language that we support. And yeah, so if you want to learn more about how to connect to it and actually like do stuff with it, I think Signalr has a bunch of docs on how you can use their different clients as well. So, but I think if you start off from the Signalr Service documentation, we should have links to everything, including some quick starts that you can build your own chat app.
Yep. Yeah, I just found it in the background, and this is pretty robust, and I'm not saying that just because I work here. Like, I'm looking through, and there's a whole bunch of tutorials which I really like, just because if I can just see the code, a lot of times then I can figure the rest out from there. So I really like the tutorials, and I really also dig that there's a testing and debugging part as well, which, not that anybody ever writes code that requires debugging, but just in case it happens.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Cool. And yeah, how about for learning more about Azure Static Web Apps?
Yeah, again, Microsoft Docs is a great place to start. But we also have a bunch of courses or modules on Microsoft Learn. And we also have a Microsoft Learn module on how to use Signalr Service with Azure Functions as well. I think with that one, you kind of build this thing in with Cosmos DB, kind of like a pricing kind of a database. So you can see a bunch of prices. And then if you update something in Cosmos DB, it instantly gets reflected in the browser. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. Throwing that into chat right now. That's
oh, nice.
That's fantastic. Very cool. All right. And where can people find you?
Oh, I don't know. You want my home address? Is that what you're looking for?
I was assuming
No.
your Twitter handle, which is right up above your
Yeah,
head.
no. Yes. Yeah. It's over here. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, you can chat with me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to find me. Yeah, but I'm sure there's different ways to GitHub, things like that.
Oh, too funny. I love it. I love it. At some point soon, once COVID is no longer a thing, I'm gonna have to get up to Vancouver. We'll have to go get dinner at Kisa
Yeah.
Tanto, which is one of my favorite restaurants in the world. So
Nice.
yeah,
That's awesome. I never heard of that place. So you're gonna show me around Vancouver. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's spectacular.
Yeah.
It's a Japanese Italian fusion
Mm,
restaurant, and yeah, it all comes together really well. So yeah, I love it.
nice. I'm sold already.
Beautiful. We will make that happen. All right, Anthony. Thank you so much for coming on, chatting about Signalr. And you are going to be back again in a couple 3 months to talk more about Azure Static Web Apps, which I'm super excited about because again that's one of my favorite things. Again, best thing we've done since VS Code. Although that little REST HTTP thing, that extension, that that might be the new one. But anyway, yeah. So thanks again for coming on and showing us all about Signalr.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a lot of fun.
Beautiful. I love it. And thank you to everybody for tuning in to Web Wednesday. Next week, we're actually going to have Cassie Brevu on, who's going to talk about Babylon JS and how you can do cool like MR things all inside of a browser with JavaScript. I'm super excited for that. So yeah, so join next week and every week where we're chatting with smart people about web dev. So thanks again for tuning in. Bye. I want that button. There we go.